Okay, good afternoon everyone, and welcome aboard this One Spatial webinar, One Data Gateway, the next stop towards better supply chain data quality. Would you like to know how you can automatically improve data quality in your internal and external supply chains, ensuring increased productivity, reduced risks, and reduced costs? If so, we hope the next 30 minutes will be useful for you. We plan to discuss the challenge and impacts in relation to infrastructure supply chains and the potential solutions our product One Data Gateway can provide. We also plan to touch on a couple of customer use cases as part of an overall view of the product. Though during this webinar, we will specifically cover the deployment of One Data Gateway to support transportation infrastructure owners, operators, and build organizations, I'm sure you'll agree that the challenges, impacts, and benefits we discuss are equally applicable to other types of organization, supply chain, and industry. However, before we get started, we'd like to introduce ourselves. I'm joined with my colleague Seb. My name is Mark Bell, and I head up the transportation vertical within One Spatial. I trained as a cartographer and a land surveyor many years ago, and have worked in the geospatial industry for the last 20 or so years in both solution supplier and owner-operator organizations. I'm currently studying exec MBA at the University of Warwick, where I'm focusing on sustainability in business. And as I say, I'm joined by my colleague and our CTO, Seb Lesware. Seb, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is Seb Lesware, CTO at One Spatial, and I've also been in the geospatial industry for over 20 years, supplying products and services to all sorts of vertical markets within the geospatial industry.
Thank you, Seb. So I believe that we have a channel open for questions during this webinar, so please feel free to submit any queries or questions you may have via the little hand that sort of sits by your name on the control panel, or via the chat window, which I think is just below that list of attendees, or where your name is. We'll then make time at the end of this session to hopefully answer some of those questions. Additionally, we'll include some contact details at the end of this webinar, and we welcome any further discussions with you about One Data Gateway. And lastly, this webinar is also being recorded and will be available after the close of the session. And we'll make sure we send out a link to you once everything is ready to view. So as mentioned, over the next 30 minutes, we'll take you through a data quality challenge for supply chains, the impact it can have on organizations, and give you a brief overview of our solution, One Data Gateway. We'll then look at two customer use cases, one focused on the capture of environmental survey data in the supply chain of a high-speed railway construction project, and then the other in the understanding of safety-related insights within a safety insights team of a highways owner-operator. But before we start, we'd like to give you a very brief introduction to One Spatial. We're an organization that provides solutions, services, and products focused on helping organizations derive value from their spatial and non-spatial data. Be it data strategy, data governance, data capture, transformation, data management, our solutions, services, and products help organizations across the world automate the way they work and ultimately help them grow their competitive advantage. So when searching for an image that best portrayed the potential challenge faced in supply chains, this one stood out. It shows, as you're probably aware, that timeless game of whispers. On the left-hand side are a string of suppliers all passing information between themselves towards an end client on the right. A client who doesn't look particularly impressed by the information that he's receiving. And it's this very challenge that we can help remedy with our product One Data Gateway. So in order to describe the challenge in more detail, let's first define what we mean in this context by a supply chain. So we see it as a string of teams and organizations that support the corporate objective of an asset operations or build organization. This could include internal teams or a number of tiers of suppliers ranging from engineering contractors who might manage a host of activities to individual suppliers of specialist activities such as environmental surveyors or civils and groundwork maintenance teams. We see two different types of supply chain. The first is the internal supply chain, made up from a variety of different business units, regional entities and specialist teams, all completing activities that contribute towards the enterprise's core objectives. And this is represented here by this smooth, sweeping green arrow. However, in reality, it's never as clean as that. In reality, we see a variety of teams interacting with a multitude of corporate systems, databases, tools, and other teams. Additionally, each team can potentially have their own silos of data with different tools and different processes for update. This can result in, at best, a low level of data quality, but more likely an unknown level of data quality, something which is far riskier for an enterprise. In addition to this concept of the internal supply chain, we also see supply chains as being external in nature. Here we see the exchange of data in the handover and hand back between the main organization and its tiered suppliers. Examples include the extraction of data from corporate stores for the completion of maintenance projects by external supply teams, as teams such as signal engineers. Challenge here being, how do the supply organizations know that the data they're getting is suitable for the standard which enables them to complete their work? Another example could be the collection of spatial and non-spatial environmental survey data captured in the field and progressively passed back through the supply chain from the specialist suppliers to the engineering management companies and finally to the end client. The challenge is, how do all the parties involved in the collection of the data know that it's correct? Should the data be manually checked? If so, should it be sampled or fully checked? Should each step of the supply chain do this? And is this the best use of their time and costs? Should tools and automation be used? And how can these involved be sure that the central specifications defining the structure of the data have been followed within those tools? And how can we automate the ingestion of good quality supply chain data into the common data environments of the engineering and asset owner organizations? So these are all questions that we've encountered and which One Data Gateway hopes to mitigate and answer. We see a number of key impacts of this poorly controlled supply chain data quality, including increased time and cost from failed data submissions, an unconnected governance view of all data in the supply chain resulted in poor views of work in progress, and the increased costs due to the deployment of manual data validation processes. So how do we resolve the challenges and impacts of this poorly controlled supply chain data quality? Well, by working with you to understand the behaviors governing the way that you want your data to act, we can then reflect those as business rules, allowing you to automatically validate, integrate, and enhance your data. So the benefits of our rules-based approach are fundamentally that we automate these data behaviors, which means 100% consistency in the checking of your data. And this leads to multiple things: the repeatability and traceability of results, with the creation of logs enabling dashboarding and better supply governance. It enables the encoding of behaviors, which behaviors can be extracted out of people's heads and committed into rules, into a repeatable standard. It provides metrics, which in turn provides evidence-based ways of working, allowing your business to start reporting on supplier performance. And our approach also breeds increased collaboration. through both the elicitation of those business rules or those behaviours and changing into business rules, through to the extra capacity that the system gives your teams once the rules take away the drudgery of excessive manual processing. And this is where One Data Gateway comes into the picture. It's the mechanism for exposing our business rules engine to your internal and external supply chains via a cloud portal. It provides an opportunity for teams to, for example, validate data before it is handed over to the next team. Whether it's across contractually binding air gaps between two different organizations or between teams within the same organization. It enables teams to quantifiably understand whether their data is fit and of a high quality to be released to their client, or if that data needs to be reworked before submission. And it ultimately saves time, effort, and cost. So to expand on those benefits of One Data Gateway in a little more detail, it supports the following. Cost and complexity reduction. So in other words, a lowering of operational costs or operating costs. Increased throughput of data, a faster pace of operating, and ultimately a reduced risk through the use of better data. So now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Seb, who will talk to you about two customer use cases and describe One Data Gateway in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, so I'm going to be showing two different scenarios. So one scenario is showing an example of an external supplier or engineering contractor providing information to be validated to make sure it's acceptable to be received by an asset operator builder. And the second scenario is example of more of an internal process where it's not just validating, it's also correcting and ingesting that data. So the first example, this is from a high-speed railway project, and one of the tasks that need to be done during the construction phase is to get environmental reports. So all the way through the life cycle of these projects, there are pre-build, build, and then operational tasks required where subcontractors are used to provide data, to provide information, to provide reports. In this scenario, it's an environmental survey that needs to be done. In particular, the example here we're going to be showing is a bat survey about bats that live in the habitats that are going to be built on. One of the problems with the flow of information is that these are often external suppliers. Sometimes there's a chain of them, so they're subcontractors who themselves employ subcontractors, and they are supposed to provide data in a standardized format. In this case, in this scenario, the data is in an Excel spreadsheet format, so what they call a Proforma, where the values have to conform to certain requirements. So here, for example, is an example of that spreadsheet where they provide information about what was inspected, what was found, where was it found. The values have to fit within certain acceptable sets of ranges or values or constraints. There's also some spatial information here. So there's a easting and a northing column that's provided, and they also are supposed to record the land registry land parcel within which that survey has been done. One of the problems, though, is that when the data is received, often it's incomplete, or it doesn't meet the standard, or it's not acceptable, and that can take a long time. It can take weeks and weeks for it to be aggregated up, received by the operator builder, validated by their data analysts. They realize then that there's things missing, there's things wrong, and they have to send it back down the chain to get that corrected. And because of that turnaround, that can take weeks and weeks. And there are also some sorts of surveys which are only possible to do at certain times of the year. And that means if you've missed that window, you may have to wait 6, sometimes even 12 months for that window to be available again in order to redo the survey. So these things can take weeks, sometimes months for that full life cycle to happen. So what I'm going to show you is an example of using One Data Gateway. So for that first scenario, we use One Data Gateway, in this case with a simplified front end for the data submitters, the external contractors to upload their Proformas. So I'm going to show that process now. So I'm going to upload Proforma that that I've logged in. Let me just log in and get that started. So I'm going to upload my Proforma file, which is my Excel spreadsheet. Then I'm going to kick off and run validation. So what it's going to do is it's going to receive that file and then run through the validation rules. And the validation rules are doing things like sometimes simple checks, like is this cell in this field accurate? Is it within the right range of values? Is it from the correct pick list of values? Is it consistent within that row of the spreadsheet? And it's also doing some cross-referencing. So it's using some external data sources such as land registry polygons to say, you've told me that the report is in this specific location, and you've also told me what you think the land registry polygon ID is, and I'm going to cross-reference that and determine, does the location, is that consistent with somewhere in the correct area for where we're building, and is it consistent with the land registry ID? Now, once we've done that report and run the validation, we can download the results. So as an external contractor, I can then open up those results and have a look. And what it's done is it's analyzed in 30 seconds or so. It's done an analysis and it's validated all these cells. There are probably over 5,000 in this particular example, over 5,000 cells of values that have been populated. And what it's done is there's a new worksheet here, a list of all of the problems that it's found. So it's found dozens and dozens of these issues, and it's reported, okay, this is the problem, this is the cell that's wrong, and this is the reason why that cell is not acceptable. And so not only is that giving us the validation results that immediately, so within 30 seconds rather than weeks or sometimes months, but also it's done 100% analysis. Currently, when they do the manual analysis, that's done as they do a subsample of it, maybe 10% of the information is subsampled. And so rather than a partial sample taking weeks, we're now getting a full analysis and full information within a few seconds. And so then as a supplier, I can then go and correct these things, make sure they're correct, and then the engineering contractor is now confident that when they're uploading it and sending it on to the operator builder, the data is correct. And the operator builder is now confident that when they receive the data, it is correct. So that's the first scenario of an external contractor. The second example is an example of internal users submitting data. So in this case, this is a highways owner operator. And one of the things that one of the types of data that they ingest and make use of is information about accidents. So every time there's an accident, the police will be recording information about the location of the accident, which carriageway is it on, which road is it on, whether it's on a slit lane or the main carriageway. And these are aggregated up to the local authorities, and then those are aggregated up and provided to the owner operator. Now, the data analysts within the owner operator will be aggregating this value themselves, and they'll be using it to make some important decisions about the highways. So, for example, if there are certain accident black spots, then the highways operator will be taking steps to try and reduce those due to with a number of things. It could be signage, could be visibility, it could be construction, it could be the surface of the road. And so this analysis is used to try and reduce one of the things that they're measured on, which is accident reduction. Now, one of the problems is the capture of the information is done usually after an accident. There's lots of things going on. The police have got lots of things to manage, and the different police forces use different techniques. Some might have device applications to help them collect the data. Some will just be using pen and paper. So there's all sorts of inconsistencies with the data that's provided. But by the time it's received at the owner operator, it's a long time down the line. So what the owner operator wants to do is to take and correct and clean that data wherever possible. And so there are various benefits to having this as an automated process. Now, what we'll show here in this example is not just validating the data and returning a report saying, here are the problems in the data. We'll see it here it's doing two things. It's validating the data and it's automatically correcting it within rules, using the tolerance defined in the rules to automatically correct in this case, the location of the data based on the attributes. And what it will also be doing is it will be ingesting the data into the back-end system automatically. So the corrected data is automatically loaded into the back-end system for analysis. And the third thing it actually does is provide a report to the person uploading it, say, well, here's all the things that couldn't be safely corrected, and these are the ones that do need to go back and need further investigation. So let me show that example now. So in this scenario, we've got data gateway, and this we can see as a user, I've logged in, and it's showing me that's actually 3 different projects that I'm involved in. But this is the central one that we're interested in. In fact, let me log into that again. So it's that central project that I'm interested in working on. So this is the data for where I am providing a set of accidents. So the set of accidents are a number of points, the point objects, and we can have a look at what those point objects look like. So here's the data that we're using, both the data that's being uploaded, the accident points, and also the reference street information, or in this case, the highways information. So if we zoom in on here, we can see the accidents have been recorded as points all over the data, and we've got the main carriageway and we've got the slip roads from the National Highways data set. If we look at the information that's stored on the accident points, for example, the accident point records information such as what is the road. So in this case, it's the M25. What is the direction? Is it up or down? Is it on a slip road or not? So here, for example, we see this is direction A on the M25. So that's an accident that's supposed to be there. Now, the locations you can see are close, but they're not exactly on a carriageway. So some of them are close. You can probably guess which one it is. But also we have cross-reference information. So because we know that accident is supposed to be associated with a main carriageway in the direction A or B, so anti-clockwise or clockwise, then we know where it's supposed to be associated with. And sometimes the nearest carriageway is not necessarily the correct one. It might be one based on the attribution, the one that's slightly further away that it should be associated with. So that's the points of what's being uploaded, and the lines are the reference data, the accurate data that we're going to correct this against. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload my set of points, and I'm going to run that validation process. So here it's going to be doing a couple of things. So first of all, it's uploading the data and seeing, let me just check that the data you've uploaded meets the required shape, the required schema for the data for our validation. And if not, you can adjust that to make your data, if your data has variable names, you can make that match the data that's being checked. And there you can see we've run in a matter of, 5 seconds, run some validation, generated some results, and generated the output file, which we can then load in. So what I can do as a user, I can say, well, let me just have a quick look at the results on the map, and I'm going to have a look at what the resulting data is. So, okay, so I can see that what it's done is it's loaded the data and it's generated the points, and you can see the lines tell us where it's moved the original points to the new location. So that gives me a preview, and I'll have a look at that in more detail in a second. So we can see the results on the map, and then once I'm happy it's finished, then I'm able to download as the internal data analyst. I can then download the resulting data that tells me, of all of things that have been snapped and matched, give me the ones that couldn't be matched at all. So for example, if something says I'm supposed to be on the M11 and it's right near the M25, then that's not something that can be automatically corrected, because there's some serious problem with the data there. Now let's look at the results. So here's the live view of the data that's in the database, and we've seen that what we can see here is it's automatically then taken the data and snapped the locations from the original point, the red point, to the correct place on the correct carriageway. So we can see that one on the left, we've got it snapped to what is the nearest place on the carriageway. This one here, the nearest place wasn't the obvious carriageway to the left. It's actually slightly further away, because the accident told us which direction carriageway it should be snapped to. Here's another good example where the closest point is actually on a slip road, but this accident was recorded as not being on the slip road, on the main carriageway. So that's been moved to the appropriate place. Now here, it's the rules that dictate what happens. How far can I safely move one of these points, and which type of carriageway should I snap it to? And we can see that that's now automatically done the correction of the data, and also told us which points could not be automatically cleaned up because they're completely wrong. They're associated with a completely different highway, and therefore that needs to be looked at more carefully. So there we can see that process, which again can take weeks and weeks to receive the data, analyze it, work out a problem, correct it, or ask the suppliers for correction. That happens in just a matter of seconds. Okay, I'll hand over to Mark now to summarize.
So to summarize, we've heard how we can consider data supply chains to be both internal and external, internal within an organization and external across multiple organizations. We've seen how poor quality, poor governance and manual validation can all impact an enterprise dearly in terms of time and cost. We talked about how our business rules approach can automatically validate, integrate and enhance data flowing across a supply chain, providing a common and accessible approach for performing these tasks. We've touched on how our solutions can reduce costs, increase data throughput and ultimately reduce risk. And we saw two customer use cases, one for the external supply chain of a high-speed railway project, and the other for the internal supply chain of a highways operations organization. So our parting comment to close, our parting comment before opening the floor up to questions is to consider the image on the screen and also to cast your minds back to the startled gentleman at the start of our webinar. So remember, he was shocked by the poor quality of data collected in his supply chain, shocked by the time and costs associated in getting to the point in time where he could finally derive meaningful insights from his data. So one data gateway can help you move away from being that startled gentleman and move to becoming this smiling young man in yellow, pleasantly surprised by the quality, timeliness and falling costs of his data. And with that, we'd now like to open up the floor to questions. So Seb, can I invite you to pull up a chair next to the virtual fireside here and we can run through a few Q&As together. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Okay, let's just, right, so just if we bear with us whilst I bring up the list of questions. So the first question we've got, it appears to be on data formats. What data formats are supported by this system, Seb?
Yeah, okay, I'll pick that one up. So the typical answer is many and most. So data formats that are, they're either traditionally spatial data formats, so shapefiles, tab files, file geodatabases, or database formats, so PostGIS, Oracle, ArcGIS Server, and as well as other formats that are both spatial, say CAD files, or typically non-spatial, such as Excel spreadsheets, CSV, and so typically it's a whole number of formats that are available, and even formats that are rare or unusual. Then we work with customers to be able to access those using a number of tools.
Okay, thank you. What else have we got? So who can define the rules? So can we, is it something that we have to do as an organization, as a supplier, or can customers define their own rules?
Yeah, I mean that's a common question as well, which is, we didn't go into any detail into how rules are defined in that case, but rules are defined using a user interface, and that's done either by the organization who's defining the standards. So for example, the owner operator would typically define those standards, and those rules would be written either by their staff, or OneSpatial can also help you to define those. And often people want to do a bit of both. They might ask OneSpatial to get them going with some initial rules, and after that they maintain them themselves, but it's all done using a user interface. There's no coding needed, no development.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple of, that's positive. So it's user interface, there's no coding, which always cuts down on time and cost again, doesn't it? Seb, whilst you're here, can I just ask you to share your screen? If we can bring up our contact details via the, is that possible? Perfect. And then the next slide.
Okay.
That would be great. And whilst you're doing that, I've also got another question for you. Quite a topical one. So have we had anybody looking at using this offering for COVID-19?
That's a good question. Not as yet. Essentially, any problem that is to do with data being uploaded and of questionable quality, or data being combined, then is applicable. So typically the Industries where we see it being used are transport, utilities, government. We've also seen sort of insurance, healthcare, defence. So it's essentially fairly neutral to the type of problem being solved, as long as there's data and rules that need to be applied to it.
No, okay. And could we? So it's fairly generic. The use cases could be wide and ranging. I suppose the benefits of using something like this is that it would enable, once we've got the rules written, it would enable that automatic checking of the data, and then potentially the automatic ingestion or integration of that data into kind of back-end systems. So again, reducing manual processing, which in a sort of an emergency situation where time is of the essence could be of a potential benefit. Would that be a
Yeah, we see. I mean, typically there are three use cases. One is, here is some data, I want it validated quickly,
yeah?
or here is some data, I want it transformed or improved quickly, or here is some data, I want it to be received and ingested automatically, just to reduce that manual step. So yes, absolutely in that case.
Okay, thank you. And I think we've got one last question. So, what's it say? I've heard you mention this was a cloud portal. Is that a private cloud?
Well, it's available both in the cloud and on premise. Either a public cloud, if that's what people want to use. If people have private clouds that they want to deploy this on, then that's fine as well. And some people, because of, for example, access to back-end systems that they want to keep within a firewall, they may want to deploy it on premise. So the answer is yes, but there's a few different options.
Okay, perfect. Well, look, thank you very much for that. So, firstly, Seb, thanks for joining me by the fire to answer some of those Q&As. And lastly, I'd like to well, do two things. Firstly, say thank you to everybody who's joined us for this last 30 or 35 minutes. We appreciate your time. And then offer up the opportunity of contact. So if you'd like to hear more about what we've shown today in this session, if you'd like to schedule a demo or just discuss it in more details, please feel free to contact us. As we say, we'll be sending out an email relatively shortly after this with a link to this recorded webinar. So in the meantime, we'd like to thank you all and safe journeys. Thanks a lot.